Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of the Triangle Area SQL Server User Group's Data Science and Business Intelligence meeting, our second one of the year. And we have the pleasure of having Meagan Longoria speak to us about why my visualizations are so bad. So, Meagan, please take it away.
All right, thanks, Kevin. I'm going to share my screen. And we'll get this started. Okay, my name is Meagan Longoria. I'm a consultant. I currently work for Denny Cherry Associates Consulting. I've been doing business intelligence consulting since like 2012 in consulting and for about 15 years total in BI. I really enjoy the data visualization part of BI, but you'll see me blog about ETL and SQL Server stuff as well. So I try to be, to some extent, end to end. But visualization is one of my favorite things because it can be so powerful in really showing the rest of the work that went into your tech stack. So I put together this presentation. There are absolutely no slides. We're just going to look at visuals that I have remade in Power BI. Some of them started in Power BI and I copied them, and show you better ways to do things. And I'm not here to say there are hard and fast rules in data visualization that you should always follow, like never, ever, ever use a pie chart. I tend to do that, but I'll tell you some reasons why it might be okay. So my goal is to help you understand why a lot of people have these preferences, why there are some rules that are backed by research and best practice, and hopefully we will have a little fun in the process. So let us start with this line chart. So take a look at the line chart for a second. This is actually my recreation of a chart produced by Verizon. They examined data breaches in different industries, and this one was focused on education. And in their version, they made their lines wavy instead of straight, and they put their legend at the bottom. But this was essentially what they provided. So when I look at this chart, I don't have a problem with line charts and visual in general, but when I look at this chart, I don't know what it's trying to tell me. I see a lot of chaos going on in here. So there are a few things that I don't like right off the bat. I do like that the legend is on the left so that people read it before they look at the chart, but that's a lot of color. That's too much for someone to take in. So a lot of times what we do is redesign to refocus on something in particular. This chart has no message. I was reading an article today where someone talks about how to judge data visualization, and we tend to judge it on precision, using the right chart types to show the right amount of precision to be as precise as possible. But there's also expressiveness, and that goes along with what we mean when we say a chart has or doesn't have a message. So in this case, I think this chart doesn't have a message. I don't know what I'm supposed to get out of it. Because we're in Power BI, I can, highlight a particular year and try to look at what's going on in there. I can highlight a particular line, and that helps a little bit. But what if we do this instead? So I took the exact same data. It's still a line chart, but I decided I have a message. So I changed up my title a little bit, and I'm going to actually put the other one back. So I said, you know what? This is from 2010 to 2017. I got rid of that awful legend and I put direct labels on my lines. And then I decided that here's what I want to point out. Here's the interesting thing that I found in this data. And it's that breaches using web applications were at the top and they went down a little bit, but then came right back up. So they're a major contributor over those 7, 8 years that we have data for. And then we also see cyber espionage. And so it started out in 2010. It was basically not an issue. It didn't even exist. But as the years went on, it became a really big deal. So now that I've only highlighted these 2 lines, hopefully you get more out of it. Your eyes are drawn to the brighter colors compared to the gray. And you can still, select points and all that, just like we did over here. But this chart, even though there are lots of lines, has more of a message because we highlighted to focus attention on something in particular. So if you haven't played around with Power BI very much, I'm just going to copy my bad chart here and show you where to find some of those features. So I kept web applications and cyber espionage, and this data is static, so I could easily just go through, wrong color, and make everything else gray. So now we get our 2 lines, but we've got a little bit of an issue here, and I'll show you. My lines are getting covered up. The 2 I care about most are getting covered up. So what I did was I actually made another column and I ordered it so that those 2 would be on top. Oh, it killed my colors. Sorry, I did that in the wrong order. We're just going to fix a few of those for demonstration purposes. It's quick. So let's do web apps are dark blue, cyber espionage is bright blue, and there we go. So that fixes the first part. I'm going to turn my legend off completely because I am going to go to my series labels. And when I turn the series labels on, I get the direct labeling of each line at the end of the line. And you could choose that. You can do left or right. Common convention is kind of to do the right side like this. And so then we get our series labels. I changed my title just to be a little more precise, and we'll talk more about titles later. The more I can tell someone what to expect in my chart, the more they'll know whether it interests them and it's worth the effort to go look at it, as well as kind of what to expect and what to look for as they're reading it. And you'll notice in my final version, I took off the axis labels because they were redundant, essentially. You can see it's a percentage without me labeling it percent. We talked about the years. So in that case, I didn't feel it was necessary to add more to that chart. So that leaves us with this final version where we give a little bit of explanation. And we could have tried to put, some of that in the title, but we don't have to. Don't be afraid of explanatory text. So many times I see Power BI dashboards that people feel like they can't put a text box and explain what's going on in the chart. And that can be one of the easiest, most helpful things. people, when you're making a chart, people try to say, I let the data speak for itself. The data never speaks for itself. The way that you're encoding it is giving a particular impression. So you might as well go ahead and take the extra step and explain why you visualize it like this. What are people supposed to take away from this? Kevin, are there any questions or comments so far?
There is a question about
Okay.
the selecting of colors there. Could you have selected everything that you wanted to change to gray and then change it all in one operation?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I think so. There used to be an all colors button. There is a new, by the way, new formatting pane that if you have the February update, it will be on by default. But because I'm trying to keep this a little bit fast paced, I have turned it off because I'm still used to the old one. And I believe you are correct that you could have turned off the separate data colors, made it all gray, and come back in and just found these two. But I don't remember where that is now. So, yes, good point. We're going to move on to, let's just take a look at our less than optimal version. This, I think I got the idea from Storytelling with Data. If you are familiar with Cole Knaflick, she's got a bunch of good tips about how to redesign charts. And most of them have to do with redesigning to better express your message. You're going to sense the theme here throughout the next several minutes. So this is about sales and that they have opportunities that their goal is to close within 90 days. And they compare direct and indirect sales. This is a pretty common chart, but we could make it so much better with a few small changes. So we're showing multiple months. We can actually put a reference line in there to say, here's our goal. And if all we want really, we can let people see the pattern of how, indirect sales went way up on time to close in 1 month. Or direct sales, and then indirect sales was way down. But I also did something else. I highlighted these 3 points, which were the only times that they missed the goal. So, oh, there we go. Let's move this up a little bit. We're going to do a few things. Again, we're going to turn off our legend. We're going to make this a line chart. And you'll notice that this was redundant as far as the year. There was only 1 year shown. So I did 2 things. I came in here and I labeled my chart title basically with my conclusion, but also with the time frame. So now that I've done that, I can change out my date for my month and just get rid of some of the clutter down there. And I can turn off my X and Y axis titles because I don't feel they add any help in comprehending. I don't need that. Those data labels are really busy all being on there. So I'm going to turn those off. I'm going to add a constant line and it's going to be at 90. And we'll make it dark gray. And it defaults to being in front of your lines. And I really don't like that. So we're going to move it behind. And we can label that line. I like to make my labels be the same color as my line where possible, or maybe just a shade darker for readability. And we can change our label to be both the data value and the name. So now we've got that nice reference line. Then we can go into our series labels again, turn them on. And then a lot of people want to know, how do you do the dot thing? Well, what I did, and this won't work for every data model, and there are a couple different ways to do it, but in the interest of time, I'll show you what I did. I have direct sales, indirect sales, and then I made a custom column that only contains values that from these two columns that are over the 90 mark. So I can actually switch this out and do direct sales, indirect sales, and highlight points. Oh, those went to the wrong place. And they all go in values. So I've got get rid of the type, direct sales, indirect sales, and highlight points. And so this is pre-formatted a little bit, but the way you get the dots is you go to shapes and you turn on customize series and you find that series and you can show your marker. You can choose your marker shape. Now I've made it square, but the important point is that you change your stroke width to 0 up here. Oh, I'm on the wrong on the wrong series. But see how I made the lines go away? We can do the same thing with the other series. So each one of these can have its own settings as far as what gets shown, whether you have markers or not. So my other two lines don't have markers, but my highlight points has a marker, and we can name this something else and say exceeded goal. So let's go back and look at what I'm calling bad. All of these are, no viz is perfect, but the unoptimized viz, excuse my shorthand in the bookmarks. We got those truncated labels. We've got a legend that's on the bottom. We have no note of the goal within the chart, just in the title. Versus we know we're in 2021. We can easily see we missed the goal 3 times. We can compare direct and indirect sales on every month or see the trend for just one of them, but it's very easy. And the message of this chart is to see, when did we miss our goal? So I much prefer, if this is my message, my intended message, the chart on the right compared to the chart on the left. Before I switch, are there any other comments, questions going on?
So if there are any questions, chat, now is a good time to get them in. At the moment, nothing.
All right. Then we're going to go ahead and go on. I did not come up with this chart. I actually found it in the data stories gallery for Power BI, and I'm not here to shame, but
Can I do that?
go for it.
That's a pretty terrible chart.
Yeah. I don't think that it communicates what they really intended. So, for one thing, it's a donut chart and it's showing total deaths by country. And donut charts and pie charts usually communicate parts of a whole. But this isn't all the countries. So we really don't know, why did they choose? Is this just the top countries? What I think would better communicate this would be if we didn't use something that communicates proportion. When you have this many slices in any kind of chart, it's hard to read. And if people care about the precise numbers, they're not actually going to read your chart. They're going to look at all the labels. Now, if we turn the labels off and just go, hey, we know a whole bunch of deaths occurred from one country and then another one, and then most of them are smaller, that's good. But I don't think that's an effective message to communicate this. And on top of that, you can you get invited to my soapbox. When you have data that is very impactful or powerful, especially when you have data that counts humans, you need to be very careful in how you visualize it. These are people. These are 900,000 people in the US that died. A lot of us know one of these people in this chart. So we cannot carelessly visualize this stuff. You are affecting people who read this chart who lost people who are no longer in their lives. So cutesy colors, novelty charts that are not very effective at communicating our message, I believe truly do a disservice when you have this kind of data. My honest opinion is that most people shouldn't be visualizing COVID data. Um, if you are not, an epidemiologist, if you don't have that kind of knowledge, if you want to do it for yourself, I don't care. But if you're putting it out there into the world, we have to consider what our impact on other people are, even if it's just our, Power BI community, our coworkers, whatever it is. This represents something that caused great harm and sadness in people's lives. So, with any data that is very emotional or very crucial to understand, that's when our chart types come into play, when our overall chart design needs to be spot on. If you have a new manager, I have a whole blog post about like you have a new manager who has to make a decision when they just started about who to let go. They need to see performance data and salary data. It better be really easy to read and not confusing because you're helping someone make a decision that impacts other people's lives. So there's my soapbox. This is what I did instead. And I didn't put a title on it yet, but even just this much is better. So I might put, let's go ahead and add a title. There we go. Top 20 countries affected by COVID deaths. So now I know what I'm looking at. Bar charts can be used to communicate part to whole, but they can also just be used for categorical comparison. And that's what I did here. So we have total number of deaths, but anytime we talk about numbers of people, it's very common you can state a total number, but we usually do that in terms of the population. So what's the impact within the population? It's nice that Romania only had 62,000 deaths, but when you put it in terms of deaths per 100,000 people, that's a lot of people. Everyone in Romania, may know someone that's no longer there. So that's why I have both of these columns, because it depends on what you're really trying to say. Overall, the impact in the world, the United States has the most deaths, and India is very high. But in terms of numbers per population, that actually changes a little bit. So because I used a table that I can sort, it's easy to go back and forth between those two messages. So let's put the other one back and just take a second to compare. So we had to go around the the donut to get our data labels and our numbers. And it gave us a percentage that wasn't really meaningful because we don't know what the whole was. And then they put this brightly colored, distracting COVID virus thing in the center. If I'm communicating something, this kind of data with importance, I want to try to design as clearly as possible within the limited space that we have. So each line is a country. I turned on some conditional formatting, which I'll show you in a second where that is, but I made sure that you can still read the numbers with the conditional formatting. I formatted the deaths as whole numbers. I formatted the deaths per 100K people as decimal numbers, which we could say, let's make that even more. Find my COVID cases and do whole deaths because you can't partially die in this data set. And then I made it so that it's sortable. And this is just a table. So I'm actually just going to build from scratch. There's no reason to start from this one. And I'm going to do country deaths and deaths per 100K. And you'll notice Power BI likes to make maps anytime it has location data, but maps are not always appropriate. So when we're ranking things to understand who had the most of something, it's often easier to see it in a bar where we just use length and a bit of color to encode that. So I change it to a table. And then I did top 20. So if I add my filter back in, only on individual visuals can you do a top in filter type. And then I want 20 and I'm going to sort it by deaths. The total is not particularly meaningful to me for this story, so I turn that off. Move this down a little bit. Then we're going to do our conditional formatting. So in the formatting pane, if we go to our measures, we can turn on data bars. And then we can control that color. If you have black text, you probably want kind of medium to light data bars so that people can still read the text behind it. Or you can make an entire other column that only has your data bars so that you don't have this overlap in the label and the bar itself. And then I can do the same thing for this one. Data bars. And I'm going to use the same color. And then I made my values bigger because there's no point in having really small text when you have plenty of room. Same thing, column headers. And then I gave it a title. And I'm just going to copy the title from the finished one. So I'll tell you something interesting about titles. Let's say, and I clearly don't have a theme defined, so I have different fonts going on, but let's say in the context of a larger report, your table doesn't need this title. Tables don't have titles by default turned on. When someone reads a Power BI report with a screen reader, it will read the chart type, the chart title, and then the alt text. So if you put the title text in here and then turn it off, the screen reader should still read that title, which could be really helpful for someone with low or no vision. So even if you don't show your titles, try to make it a practice to include the titles, no matter what, to help out screen reader users, especially in public data that goes to the general public. We want to be very aware of accessibility. And alt text and titles are one major way that we can do that pretty easily. Just a few clicks and copy paste of text. All right. Any questions, comments, discussed at the COVID thing in the center before I go to the next one?
I stand by my original statement that that's an awful visual. No comments or questions from chat so far.
All right. Let's talk about gender colors. This one's a little different. This chart isn't inherently horrible. It's not how I would visualize it. And I actually took the better version from something I did for Workout Wednesday, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end. This is visualizing the number of Nobel laureates by prize category. And there are more in some categories simply because those categories have existed for longer. Economics came in later. And this is looking at female versus male or unknown, because the Nobel Prize has been around for a while and they didn't record the genders of every person in their data set. So this actually comes from like the Nobel Prize website. They have an API that you can pull data from. And it uses the traditional blue and pink to represent genders. And there's a couple problems with this. One is we don't want to use our data viz to persist gender stereotypes. Females do not have to be pink and frilly, and males don't have to be blue. And it's easy to fall into that trap. You'll see lots of news organizations still do it. But there is a really good article. I want to say it's from Data Wrapper about how to avoid doing this. They look at what organizations that publish a lot of data viz used and noted that you don't have to fall into the pink blue trap. There's some good things about it in that depending on what culture you come from, those are kind of automatically recognizable. But there's also the persisting gender stereotypes, and there's some unknown gender in here. So we're probably incorrectly categorizing it by grouping it with male if we use these colors anyway. So here's what I did instead. This is an infographic visual, and it's called an isotype visualization. And in an isotype visualization, you use icons to represent a certain number of items. So it's not always one-to-one. In this case, as I note in the description, each unit represents 10 distinct winners. But I switched my colors to say, hey, the red units are female because this is what I'm focused on as my message. And you'll notice the consistent color coding. So in my title, women is red. When I talk about the red units, the font is actually red. In the visual, the actual color matches this text up there. So here's an isotype visualization. And what we'll notice, again, just like with that, we'll add back the bar chart. Just like with that bar chart, we can see there are a different number of awards that were granted. So again, we still kept the absolute number and decided not to represent it as a percentage so that we would have 100% for each category. So we can see, yeah, there are fewer economic sciences laureates in general, regardless of gender, and then only a tiny portion, 2 out of 89 went to women. Literature, 16 out of 118. Physiology or medicine, there's a total of 224 and 12 women. So very little. And in my tooltip, I have the percent going on in there. You can add different things like that. This, I'll tell you, this infographic visualization is not, it's great. It can do a lot of things, but it's not entirely customizable. I struggle to make the legend or the axis labels the way that I like them to be. But sometimes you settle for good enough. So the infographic designer visual is a custom visual. Oh, and that, no, I didn't use it. I took it back. Another way, there are some like side-by-side bar charts that you can do to kind of emulate that table that I just made. But there are a couple things to note. So when you do this, I'm going to go ahead and put in my prize category. Laureates. Yeah, there we go. So it's going to start out as a bar chart. And then we'll add percent gender and women. And then you have to go in and it has its own editor. There's a couple visuals like this. So when you click the edit button, you'll start seeing some options there. But before I do that, I'll use this one since it's already set. You have to go in and set a few options over here. So here, again, you can turn your legend off. You can decide which axes you would like to turn on. We do format the data values here, and you do your axis font size as a percentage of the plot area, which is a little different. Then we click on our editor, and it gives you different shapes that you can use. You can upload your own, or you can choose one that they have available. So I'm using this kind of award looking icon. And you can make it one unit or multiple units. So I made it multiple units so it could be an isotype visualization. And then you have to set it to count by amount and row. Otherwise, you end up with something undesired. So here's where I set my 10. I could have chosen something different. I chose something that I thought did a good job of capturing the data in a limited amount of space. And then you tell it how to fill it. And that's where that percent gender comes in, is that's what I'm using to denote the red part. And so we turn on the value color and set it to red. And then the non-value color I set to dark gray. I allowed it to show partial items to better represent the totals. So if I turn on whole items, then there's kind of an extra piece that, since I'm representing 10 people, is a little bit misleading. And you can tell it to keep the ratio or not. And so that's what gives us that, oh, go back. That isotype visualization. And we fill it from left to right so that the red starts at the 0 point, and we put all those colors together so you can kind of skim down that. So that's how I'm going to delete that one, make our isotype visualization. And I changed a setting there, but that's okay. So if you are representing genders, don't forget that there are multiple genders, more than 2. gender is not binary, and that you can use colors other than pink and blue. And if you're focused on a single gender, then you really don't have to make that decision, um, other than you can choose a color that highlights, that stands out as the color for focusing on the gender you're discussing in your database. That's my bright red. This could have been men Nobel laureates if I was focused on that, or the unknown ones, and it could have been red. So we're not ascribing human qualities of some sort to our color here. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Yep. One comment, one question. While you were working with the column chart, the statement was, "I hate gray text." And yeah, that default gray, the contrast is so low.
On the column chart?
Yeah,
Oh,
it
in
was
this one or the one before?
the one before. So not the sorry on the that one, but you were working on showing a column chart and the
Oh,
um
in the infographic designer.
yeah, and the column value was this light gray color.
Yeah,
Uh, and the question is there a way to prevent partial symbols in there?
there is. So I chose to,
Oh, there it is.
it's
Show partial
this,
item.
yeah. So there's show partial item. But again, remember what you're representing. So this is just a design decision. It's not necessarily always right or always wrong. But because I said each one of these units represents 10 laureates, I have 224 laureates. So how do I visualize that for? I'm choosing to show a partial symbol because if I did the whole thing, I think that that says that we have 230, which we don't. So I'm choosing to intentionally show a partial item. And I could have gotten around that by picking something that these numbers more easily divide into so I don't have partials. Or I could choose a different, set my amount per unit differently. Or I can try to use some combination of the the visual, the unit, and the background to indicate, um, I have, if my units are 10, that there's only 4 here. So that's the thing to be careful about. Yes, you can make it so it doesn't show a partial item, but this guy is really only 4 people. So that is the struggle there. But yes, you absolutely can set it to that if it makes sense for your visual.
Makes sense.
All right, last thing. And since I only really get to talk to Kevin, I'm going to put Kevin on the spot. Kevin, what do you see in this dashboard?
So first thing that caught my eye was the map. I mean, I don't know what it represents yet. Then I saw the squiggly line in the bottom left. Um, my eyes are actively avoiding any text in the top because that would involve having to read, and I don't want to. Also, it's a little slightly hard to read. Maybe it's just the screen here. That color contrast.
Yeah, I'm glad you said all the stuff that that I needed you to say. That was perfect. So there's a lot of things going on in here. Kevin mentioned he looked at the map first, and that's typically because there's a lot of color saturation because of this background, the blue representing ocean on the map. So our eyes get drawn to really bright colors, really big areas of color, large objects. So this is, because of the blue, is kind of the largest plot on the page. And it's got a few different colors in it with this one green, which looks a little strange because there's no legend on here to say what it is. Then we have this internet sales by date. That line is really squiggly. And the reason why that line is really squiggly is because it is actually representing each individual day. If I'm in sales, I might not care about every day. I might care about weeks or months, but not days. So we have a level of granularity problem here. And this chart uses entirely different colors from this stacked bar. And the stacked bar is very hard to read because there are a lot of product subcategories in here that have been grouped into their categories. So the bikes is kind of okay, but then there's like 8 colors and you can't really see them. You can sort of kind of attempt to hover over them. We make it bigger, you can see a few more of them. That's probably not ideal. And typically when we design dashboard style reports in Western cultures, we tend to put the most important things in the top left. We do a Z pattern. So we start reading in the top left, go to the right, go down, and then go across again. We wasted our top left with an internal company logo. If this is an internal report, we all know we work at Contoso. If this doesn't distinguish the report in any way, like I have clients who themselves have clients and they produce reports about an individual client, then maybe I could see the logo being useful. But in this case, it doesn't really add anything other than a little pop of color for me. I would rather find other ways to make that better looking. So I just duplicated this page so that I can mess around with it. Oh, the other thing is this is a big white area full of slicers. I really only want to put things over here in the top left if I want users to interact with them before viewing the report. If these are just like options that people might want to use to select different things, but they may or may not use them all the time, then I probably don't want them in the top left. So let's fix our charts first. And let's just get rid of date. And we'll do yeah, I forgot to sort this guy, so we'll do that too. We have month names. But we need to sort it by month number of year. And then we need to fix our, oh, he didn't sort. It did sort. It just doesn't want to sort by that. Sort axis by English month name. There we go. And we're going to leave it ascending. So now we've got January, but what I really want is month and year. And typically I would do that in Power Query. It's a little messy back here, so don't mind the mess. This is actually coming from AdventureWorks database. If I were doing this correctly, there should have been a column already in here. But since there's not, we're going to make one. So we're going to say English month name, oops, and year. Enough. Oh, and that needs to be text. There we go. So now I have a new field. with poor capitalization, but that's okay. And we have a different problem to deal with in that it is now categorical. So it's going to try to turn them all vertically. And it has, of course, sorted itself incorrectly. So then I have to decide, I have a lot of actual room. Could I spread it out? Could I use my date but make it maybe drilled down from year to month? Let's do, depending on what message you're trying to convey. So I don't know, because this is just a random dashboard, but maybe I start here and tell them, give them instructions to drill down. Either way, we know that day is too much. So I might want to set it at an entirely different level, or I may want to limit my data. Do they really care what it's been like for the last 5 years, or do they care about, whatever the last year that's selected is? And I can write some DAX to always just visualize 2014, which is the last year in the data. So we fix our granularity issue like that. The map has a couple things going on. This is actually conditionally formatted coloring. So it's a filled map by state using internet sales in our data colors. So it's a gradient and it's got a diverging color palette. And usually there's a diverging color palette when we're doing something where there's like a 0 in the middle. So temperatures can often have diverging color palettes. Sales is kind of, from 1 to whatever large number, a million. It doesn't really need a diverging color palette. It's actually not meaningful that way. So what if I changed, and for ease of access, I'm just going to make it all blue. And then because I made everything blue and the background is blue, I may want to change the background. So we can do grayscale, we can do Arial, but pick the background that makes the most sense for your data. I don't actually need to know where the forests are when I zoom in, so maybe Arial is not a good choice. Black could be, but it draws too much attention again because we've got this like saturation going on in a big block. So I would probably go grayscale just given this. But we have another problem. What if we shouldn't be using a filled map at all? What if I turn this into a regular map and then I replace my state province with city? And what you'll notice is we were coloring entire states, but Montana only had one city with sales. Colorado only had one city, Lakewood. Utah had 2 cities. So it's not like these sales are spread out evenly over the land mass. In Massachusetts, all the sales are on the right side. There's no sales over here, but we colored, when we do the filled map, the entire state based on the internet sales. So we have to decide what we're trying to show. And especially with internet sales, this is mapping customer locations. Is it more useful? This chart isn't particularly busy as a bubble map. Is it more useful to do the bubble map so that you can actually see, well, things are, heavily saturated on the coast. There's not much going on in here. I think this gives me a little bit better idea of where my customers are. So maybe I don't really want by state. I mean, we can still see the states in the map. So if we want to group it, that's fine. We can make a DAX calculation that says the state total. Every time you hover over a dot anyway, it'll give you the city total and the state total. So what if I don't do by state because landmass doesn't represent customers or really where the sales came from? Um, we really, in fact, only need a map if we're interested in geographical location. So just because you have location data doesn't mean it has to be a map at all. We may want to just compare. So I'm going to leave this here for a second. But what if I just bust out the good old trusty bar chart? If I'm really interested in states, maybe I've got my salespeople organized by state, and I do need to see that information, then maybe I just do a bar chart because it ranks it and you can see comparisons across the states. So not every location has to be a map. I'm going to leave it as a map for now. And then we've got this thing. This thing is kind of awful. It doesn't really say anything. The legend goes on. You can't even read the legend all at once. Anytime we have a stacked bar with lots of categories and it's a little bit hard to read, it can be a good candidate to turn into small multiples. So if let's do product category there, axis there. Bikes went away. Oh, we have 3. Yep. We got to change our grid. Let's do this is not ideal because the product categories don't span categories. So we can't do a small multiple quite like that, but we can try with different visual types. Or if we know AdventureWorks hasn't changed in 20 years, we don't actually have to use the small multiple itself. Let's put it back in I like horizontal because it gives us room for our labels. You can just make 3 charts. And this one can be, need my product category back. Accessories. And this one could be bikes. And so on. So it depends on what we're trying to say. Or if what we really wanted to communicate was mostly just that we have product categories, here's what they are, then maybe we don't need the subcategories at all. This is the decisions you have to make. Everything has context, and most of it is, what you're trying to explain to your end user. If this is always like this, bikes sell a ton, accessories and clothing very little, this isn't so useful. So I may choose a different visual. I may make more room and say, you know what? I don't need, let's do product category in the legend and subcategory in the axis and drop it down there. And we'd fix our data labels and all that. But that gives us a much cleaner look. We can still see precise numbers for the really small amounts. And if we really need to know what category each of these belongs to, we can color code it. We can add a sort order that makes them sort by product category. We have choices there, but that's going to do us a lot better than that stacked bar thing. So I took up a lot of room with these slicers. I don't need my logo on my internal report. Maybe the thing I care about most is by product, so I put that first. And then I can decide what I want to do with these slicers. The simple thing would be if everybody comes to the report and they look at it in general first, and then they slice, kind of an exploratory experience, then I may put them on the side. And do a little kind of panel. Let's make that smaller, and we'll make our data label smaller. And do kind of a little panel on the side. Then I can group them. And I need my selection pane. And group. And then I can even set a bookmark. Let me add a button first. So if we say expand, where's my text? Expand slicers. It's not going to be super pretty right now, but it'll work. Put a small, we'll do a fill instead of an outline. So we know it looks a little more like a button. And we'll make this one not visible. And we'll set a bookmark. So we'll call that expanded. And then we'll set another bookmark. So that, oh, I need to go update that one. So I don't really care about the data. I'm more interested in the display there. There we go. So when it's expanded, we'll see all of those. And then I can take my button, turn on an action, bookmark, expanded. So now when I click it, those will show up. And you can add another button to collapse it back, which refers to the other bookmark. So I think I'll kind of stop there, but I think you get the idea. We reordered, so it's more important. We picked our levels of granularity, decided what level of granularity and precision we cared about for the map and the line, and then picked something that was easier to read so that we didn't have lots of tiny little slices all together. And things that people don't need to interact with on the report, like the giant logo in the top left corner, or maybe our optional slicers that could have been in the filters pane to begin with, we move them off to a less prominent position. And we'd probably fix our colors so that the screen is actually a blue so that it kind of ties in. Hopefully you saw some things that were new for you. and learned a few things, including not to make giant coronavirus donut charts. If there are any final thoughts, questions, comments, happy to take them.
So, chat, this is your opportunity to get questions, comments, thoughts in. While that's going on, I do want to say thank you so much, Meagan, for taking the time to walk through some good examples, well, bad examples, and making them good examples.
Yeah. I just want to say, everybody learns. We all started out probably doing this. Power BI makes it easy to do this. It's a little harder to do the slightly more professional version. So, yes, I'm calling these things out, and someone really did make these charts, but we've all made those charts. So, don't feel bad if that's you. We all learned somehow, and hopefully, maybe you learn from me so you can move past that and make more professional looking charts.
Indeed. And we're getting thank yous from chat. So it looks like we may not have any questions. So I guess let's wrap things up for the evening.
All right.
So thank you again, and thank you everybody in chat. And we will see you again next month. It's already going to be next month. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks, and we'll start this whole process over. So until then, everyone, take care.